Yeah, sure.
Gli insegnamenti saranno in inglese, c'è la traduzione simultanea per chi ha bisogno con le cuffiette e gli apparecchi ai lati delle porte d'ingresso e della porta della cucina.
Namo Guru Be Namo Buddhaya Namo Dhammaya Namo Sanghaya Namo Guru Be Namo Buddhaya Namo Dhammaya Namo Sanghaya Namo Guru Be Namo Buddhaya Namo Dhammaya Namo Sanghaya Namo Tri Ratnaya. Good evening, everybody, and I am going to begin with a short discourse on the subject of the topic, which is about the Ganden Oral Transmission Lineage. I was told to give a brief talk about that, and I'm still trying to construct and brainstorm within my head as to how to present it, to be honest. And but of course, I decided to start with a very short prayer, refuge, and I think that is enough, because the longer we go with prayer, the shorter we will have the time for discussion. And I believe it is from 5 to 7? Yes. 2 hours is quite comfy, and I'll try to fit in as much as possible. That's all I want to say as a starter, and buonasera. Is there a translation?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. Simultaneous.
So, okay, I don't have to stop then. Okay, okay. All right, okay. Let me begin by saying that the discussion about the Ganden oral transmission as such is supposed to be a lineage. And when we speak of a lineage is necessarily something that is not widely known in mainstream Buddhist practices, but it is something that is known generally when we speak of in the sutra terminology. Lineage is spoken of as a thread or as a transmission of an unbroken line of something that is being parted and which goes on for generations. Like, for example, as I was saying, in the sutra context, the sutra is the exoteric, context of the Buddhist teaching, and that which is non-sutra is considered to be the esoteric context of the Buddhist teachings. That is, I'm sure all of you know what I'm talking about. If there's anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, just raise your finger, okay? So maybe I can pause and then explain. So, as I said, the sutra context of the teaching, we speak of the Vinaya transmissions, and there are various schools of Vinaya, meaning, ordination lineages. Those are spoken of, and there is what you call the transmission of the three baskets, the famous three canons, or the three collected volumes of the teachings of the Buddha, which is generally or commonly understood by mainstream Buddhists as the collected teachings of the Buddha. However, in those collected teachings of the Buddha, you do not have anything such as a Mahayana teaching or a Mahayana transmission. If you want to call it a Mahayana lineage also, you probably can call it, but there are no such things as Mahayana teachings to be found within the sutra collection of the so-called Tripitaka. And I suppose most of you also may be aware of that, or probably may not be aware of that, but then this is information for you. Now, the reason why I say Mahayana is not to be found within the collection of the three baskets is mainly due to the fact that Mahayana was a latter development. Some people tend to call it an interpolation, okay? An interpolation in the sense that some people tend to say that it's a fabrication. It's a fabrication, and it was not the spoken words of the Buddha, or it wasn't the spoken teachings of the Buddha, or that the Buddha never taught anything near to a concept called Mahayana. So therefore, for that reason, many of the Mahayana teachings, which seemingly, if you speak from the historical context, the Mahayana teachings appeared apparently 300 years later, after the passing away of the Buddha. There are scholars and people who disagree with this contention, and there are those who say that the Mahayana teachings existed precisely even during the times of the Buddha. Now, these are academical assertions for your kind information. If it's boring, we'll stop at that and go forward with our next discussion, which was already about lineage. So as I said, that the term lineage here, when you are speaking of within the sutra context, it is about the line of transmission of ordinations, upasampada in Sanskrit, nyambar zopa in Tibetan. So this line, the various lines or the transmissions that came along, they all have names. We don't need to discuss all those names. But precisely, let us put it in this way. The lineage that we are talking about, therefore, becomes something that is very exclusive of Tibetan Buddhism and the traditions of Buddhism that arose within Tibet, okay? You can say that these began with the old transmission school and the new transmission school, okay? So the old transmission school, generally speaking, is dubbed as the Nyingma or the old school. And the new translation school is dubbed as the Sarma, or the new development, or the new evolutions or transmissions, or the new translations also. It is also called the development later, that is latter dissemination. In Tibetan, it's called Chidar, okay? So, it is in all of these discussions that you find the concept of transmission, the concept and the word transmission mentioned over there. Now, let us focus first and foremost simply on the term Ganden Oral Transmission, okay? Ganden Oral Transmission. In Tibetan, Ganden Nyeng Yu, okay? Tushita Karna Parampara in Sanskrit, okay? Tushita Karna Parampara. So, what is it exactly? What is it exactly understood as? Now, there are three different terminologies used for this very one and the same, phrase. One is Ganden Year Whispered Lineage, the other is the Ganden Closed Lineage, and as we just now spoke, the Ganden Oral Transmission Lineage. As the English context of the term Ganden Oral Transmission does not really explain much, let us say it is hardly close to the original Tibetan understanding. So let's go through all these three terminologies, by the way, for a clarification, for a better understanding. When we say Ganden Closed Lineage, the meaning here is that meaning of the close here is not the open and close, not the open and close. It is the proximity. It is the nearness. It is the proximity that we are talking about. So proximity in what sense? Proximity in the sense of there is a master and there is a disciple. Okay, there is a master and there is a master and there is a student, or there is a teacher and there is a teacher and there is a disciple. Let's speak of it in the more esoteric sense. So let us call it the Hierophant and the neophyte. Okay, the Hierophant and the neophyte. So the transmission between the Hierophant and the neophyte, I'm going to use this term because this is a little bit more esoteric. And because the subject, Ganden Oral Transmission, is also esoteric, so I'm going to use this esoteric vocabulary, the Hierophant and the neophyte. Now, what is this business between this Hierophant and the neophyte? It is a condensation or a summarization or a compact version of the teaching made like a microchip. I'm going to use the technological word microchip. Now, we all know what a microchip is. I'm sure you all know that, right? Yeah. A microchip version of the teachings. Now, is there a possibility, or is there such a thing called a microchip version of the teachings? Probably you can go back home and scratch your head and you might consider if there is such a possibility. The self-healing practices that you are doing, for example, is a microchip version of the tantras, which are very complex and which are very vast and which you really have to know. By the way, you would have to have an academical degree for that, but happily you don't, or you do. I have no idea. So, this this microchip version that I'm talking about is necessarily a summary, a synopsis, a summary and a synopsis of the teaching, and probably a more pragmatic and a direct approach to be able to achieve results or come along with some kind of realization or effects or fruits as quickly as possible. Now that's what generally speaking esoteric teachings or esoteric transmissions are all about. So when we are talking about this transmission between the Hierophant and the neophyte, it is what you call these esoteric set of teachings which has been given personally by the master to the disciple in proximity. So the master teaches this particular disciple in particular because the master finds the capability or prepeschiousness, the capability, the potential. The master finds that potential in that disciple, therefore hands it over. And because it's very rare and because it's very unique, it's not given to a vast gathering of disciples or to a multitude of disciples or people. It is given to only one particular disciple. And because it is given in closed-door secrecy and in proximity, so for that reason it is called closed lineage. Okay? So therefore, you need to understand the meaning of the term closed lineage in the sense of that. Now let's come to the ear-whispered lineage. The ear-whispered lineage, which is commonly being used and very popular amongst the non-Gelukpa, traditions and the non-Gelukpa, non-Gelukpa commentaries and teachings, the ear-whispered lineage. Apparently, it's not Max Muller, but it's W.Y. Evan Vance who used the term ear-whispered. And the translation is rather odd, but it is because the master has individually said or transmitted to the disciple in close proximity and secrecy for the given exclusivity that I've already spoken about, and has not transmitted it to anybody else. So therefore, for this reason, it's called ear-whispered lineage. But the wrong impression that many people get is that the master goes cupping his hands like this on the face into the ears of the disciple. It has nothing to do like that. That's the second understanding you need to have, that this is applicable in a sense, but this doesn't go very close to the actual term. The third term, which is Ganden Oral Transmission Lineage, is very clear in the sense that it is being orally transmitted. Any transmissions would have to be oral. It can't be recorded. If you're speaking of recorded transmissions, or if you're speaking of, transmission even in the term of an echo, an echo, so even that isn't going to be valid as a transmission. It has to be the master directly in full conscious view of the disciple, and the disciple in full conscious view of the teacher receiving it directly there and then. So that connection and that proximity and the secrecy involved and the exclusivity involved in the transmission makes it what you call the Ganden Oral Transmission Lineage. Now, lineage, which is translated as parampara in the Indian language and gyupa in the Tibetan, that is a flow, you may also as well see that even Tantra is also called gyu. It has the same spelling in Tibetan. It's called gyu. It is just gyu, let me not spell it. But the word is almost the same to gyupa. The word seems almost alike in the sense, because Tantra in itself also is a continuum. The transliteration or immediate terminology, Tantra, translates as continuum. So gyu. And there is a Tibetan word which says gyun, which is continuum. So this lineage that we are talking about is a kind of continuation in the sense that it is an unbroken line, like a transmission of electricity which comes from the main depot and goes through various different connections into the houses of hundreds of millions. So in the same way, the transmission or the lineage is something which goes from person to person, from teacher to disciple, and from disciple to disciple. So this is one understanding of the literal term of Ganden Oral Transmission. Now, coming to Ganden Oral Transmission, what is it necessarily? Now, many people have the tendency of thinking that it has mainly esoteric tantric transmissions of teachings, or about the winds, channels, drops, energies, things like that. That is the general impression. Now, is it that necessarily, or is it much more than that? Then the answer to that would be, it is neither. It is neither. You see, it is neither, because Ganden Oral Transmission Lineage is not only about a tantric transmission or esoteric teachings. It is also about sutra transmissions. Essentially, in the words of my own spiritual master, Ganden Oral Transmission has much to do with the concept of relying on a spiritual guide and practices of Guru Yoga, even esoteric transmissions of mind transformation or mind training, call it whatever. In Tibetan, what is called lojong is these days translated as mind transformation, mind training. I think both are applicable. Both are applicable. You can call it mind transformation or mind training. The third are what you call the Mahamudra training or the Mahamudra teachings. So therefore, Ganden Oral Transmission lineages have very specific instructions made compact and made easily attainable or approachable, in the sense that if you do practice it accordingly, the possibility, I wouldn't call it the promise, I wouldn't use the word promise, The possibility is that you can reach enlightenment within a lifetime of 3 years, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days, and who knows what more. It's all with 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. Okay? It seems to occur in certain Ganden oral transmission texts randomly. It isn't made obvious. It isn't made obvious when I say that is in the sense that you're not going to find it repeatedly mentioned over there. You will find it mentioned in the introduction to the Guru Puja manual by the great Panchen Lama Losang Chögyin, the fourth Panchen Lama, okay? You will find it mentioned in certain texts of certain Gelukpa stalwarts. Let me not call out all these names. In the texts or the treatises of certain stalwarts, including Pabongka Rinpoche, Pabongka Dechen Nyingbo, Dechen Nyingbo, the essence of bliss, as is his nickname. You will find it mentioned there also. And you will find it mentioned in the texts of certain masters. Like, for example, I'll mention one, Jamyang Shepa, Ngawang Sundru, you will find it mentioned over there. And there is there are also texts of Longdol Lama. It's a late 18th century master. Pabongka Rinpoche is an early 20th century master. Jamyang Shepa is a 17th century AD master. So you can say in the span of these 3 centuries, not decades, 3 centuries, you have off-made statements or stray statements made by these 3 very eminent Gelukpa stalwarts. And what they are basically talking about is the possibility of reaching enlightenment within 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days, etc., etc. Now, generally speaking, from the tantric point of view, as it is, we speak when we speak from the tantric point of view, we speak of the 4 tantras. Okay, the 2 lower tantras and the 2 higher tantras. And from within the 2 higher tantra, we speak specifically of the highest yoga tantra, Maha Anuttara Yoga Tantra, okay? Nenjor Lame, that's in Tibetan. We speak of the highest yoga tantra. Now, the concept of the understanding from the point of view of practice in the highest yoga tantra is that if you sincerely do the practices, the sincere engagement of the practice is a common thing, It's not a rigid code of discipline or practices of austerity demanded in that concept. It is the same as if you have a very exclusive electronical gadget in your hand, you're going to get a thick manual which tells you do this and don't do that, and there is this much of guarantee, and if you put your hands on the wrong buttons, you're going to falter, you're going to break it or damage it. These things are common even in modern day technology. You have the do's and don't do's. In the same way, in the practice of the tantras, you have what you call, you have very strict injunctions, you may say, admonishments or instructions to keep the 3 vows, the pratimoksha, that is the self-liberating vows, or call it the layman, laywoman vow, the novice or the fully ordained monk vow, or fully ordained nun, whatever. And the bodhisattva vows, and then the mantrayana vows. If you keep them purely and you maintain the practice, generally speaking, it is the creation stage yoga practice. If you keep that practice and adhere to it sincerely, then you have been more or less promised that it is supposed to be coming from the mouth of Vajradhara himself, that you will attain enlightenment in 16 lifetimes. 16 lifetimes. The other assurance is that of one lifetime. But it is the Ganden Oral Transmission that says that, it says that not only that, in 3 years, 3 months, 3 weeks, it is possible. Means that's the shortest. How true it is and how possible such things can be is a question of application. It's not a question of speculation, it's a question of application. Like for example, if you ask the Ganden Oral Transmission stalwarts as to whether there were people, if there were really people who accomplished enlightenment in such a short lifetime, you will find many names mentioned. Many names, well, you will definitely find three names mentioned. Three names in particular mentioned. Perhaps 2 generations after Tsongkhapa. In one discourse that our great master Song Rinpoche gave in somewhere in the United States, he was giving a talk on Guru Puja. In a commentary, he has referred to a very famous Nyingma Lama, I forgot the name of that Nyingma Lama, and that Nyingma Lama has sort of in his diary made a comment that during the lifetime of Je Rinpoche, Tsongkhapa, there has been at least about 100 or more practitioners who achieved union, which means they achieved enlightenment. That's another way of putting, relating to enlightenment. They achieved union in one lifetime. This is a Nyingma Pa Lama referring to the disciples of Tsongkhapa. So, true or untrue, it was a statement made by Song Rinpoche. He is not a master to trifle with. And therefore, it seems like already, although historically speaking, we have only 3 masters mentioned, documented, mentioned as having reached enlightenment in one lifetime, that also in the 3-year, 3-month, 3-week period. There were even more than 3, that is to say 100 as such, who had reached enlightenment in one lifetime. Now, from the period or the span of time of Tsongkhapa, that is, let us say, early 14th century onward until contemporary times, which means we are already on the 21st century, the 3rd millennium. If there are masters, or if there are great adepts or people who have actually reached enlightenment in such a short lifetime, I think if there are, I am 100%, or let me say I am 199% sure, just 1% less, I'm 199% sure that nobody is going to come forward and advertise themselves or present themselves in front of you to convince you, because there is no market for Ganden Oral Transmission Lineage. If there is no market for the Ganden Oral Transmission Lineage, then what am I doing here? I am certainly not marketing it. I'm just talking about it. I'm randomly talking about it because I was asked to talk about it. That's the point, okay? That's the point. Now, having spoken of the Ganden Oral Transmission and what essentially it is, and what the terminology itself means, I think it's now necessary to understand Ganden Oral Transmission Lineage in the sense of where it fits as Buddhist teachings. Now, for example, if you are going to talk of an oral transmission lineage in terms of Tibetan Buddhism in general, that is Nyingma, Sakya, Kagyu, the four great, and the 8 smaller Kagyu schools. Of course, all the 8 smaller Kagyu schools don't actually exist. And in terms of the 4 great Kagyu schools, the Kama Kagyu is now predominantly sort of, in wider numbers, in greater numbers. So if you are speaking about the Chonang tradition, which is another tradition, there is also, there used to be a tradition which used to be called Shije, but that more or less has gone to a minority. I have an understanding that there is a minority group that call themselves Shije that do exist, but the Chonang are in quite big numbers. The Chonang protagonists were one that were persecuted by, what you call political bigwigs of the Gelukpa establishment and organization, to come to the point. But that's a sidetrack discussion. This is not my main discussion. My point is that the term oral transmission is common to Tibetan Buddhism. Nyingmapas have it, Kagyupas have it, the Chonang, the Shije school, all of these schools, they have it. In fact, I would say that the Nyingmapas were the first to come out with the concept of transmission, because Gelukpa is what you call a very new development and a latter development, which happened somewhere between the 14th century and the 15th century AD, after Christ. Okay? So the oldest of the Tibetan Buddhist schools, the first to evolve, was necessarily the Nyingmapa tradition. And in the Nyingmapa traditions, you have very elaborate descriptions of so-called transmissions. You have transmissions in the sense of long transmissions. You have transmissions in the sense of short transmissions. And in the short transmissions, you have transmissions of pure visions. You have other transmissions like treasure, like hidden treasures, and prophetic dreams. And you have mind treasures, and you have many. I am not counting them exactly accordingly, but roughly speaking, there are many different ways of transmissions that the Nyingmapas talk of, and they are the original people who talk about transmissions. But when I say this, does that mean the term transmission did not exist prior to the Nyingmapas? That is also not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that when Tibetan Buddhism started in the Tibet mainland, it did start with the Nyingmapas who first began to talk about transmission. That is a fact. That is a fact, and nobody can actually deny it. That's number one to keep in mind. Now, as I began to say that, how do you consider, or how do you fit the term transmission within the Buddhist teachings? Now, I just briefly mentioned that transmission is not really foreign to mainstream Buddhism as such, because the sutra teachings, you have the ordination line, which is considered to be a transmission. You have the line of the teachings or the discourses of the 3 baskets that have come down, although it is not spoken of as coming from Hierophant to Neophyte. It is spoken of, it certainly is spoken of as a transmission. Okay? Okay. So now, where does the term transmission in itself as an exclusive vocabulary of Tibetan Buddhist schools, how does it fit within the mainstream Buddhist tradition? When I'm talking about mainstream Buddhist tradition, I'm not just talking about Tibetan Buddhism, I'm talking about all Buddhism at large. And is that Buddhist teachings? We have to first speak of it in terms of whether that is a Buddhist teaching or not. Then, within the terms of Buddhist teachings, we have what you call the four great seals. The point is the Ganden Oral Transmission is a set of transmission of teachings which are necessarily Buddhist. But in establishing as Buddhist teachings, you need to have some kind of background understanding of how does it become Buddhist teachings, because the Theravadins do not speak of it. The Mahayanists of the other schools do not, like the Chinese Mahayanists, the Japanese or Vietnamese or Korean Buddhists do not speak of it. That's about it with mainstream Buddhism. These schools do not speak of anything called oral transmissions. They do not speak of anything called lineages in that sense, like we speak of. Again, most of the teachings that we are talking about are not available even in the Mahayana traditions, for example, that you find relevant right now in Korea, Japan, and China. Most of these Mahayana schools do not accept the tantric transmission or the mantrayana teachings. They do not accept it as the teachings of the Buddha. As far as an oral transmission goes that we speak of as being unbroken, even that they do not speak of. So how do we legitimize, how do we validate these as the teachings of the Buddha? Now it is very simple, The main thing is that we need to understand that Mahayana teachings in the very beginning itself did not come about without controversy. It arose from within a background of controversy. The controversy that I'm talking about is when Nagarjuna came with his very unique ideas of emptiness, and the fact that he brought over the treatises, the collected works on emptiness, specifically in 3 different volumes of what you call the large wisdom perfection teachings, the middling version of the wisdom perfection teaching, and the summarized version. So we call it the Prajna Paramita, the large, the medium, and the short volume. These were the 3 texts that he discovered for the first time, or let us say he had it resurfaced from within the realm or within the sphere of what is called the Nagas, the Naga spirits. He brought it over from there. This is one version. The second version is that the Mahayana teachings were already predominant there even during the time of the Buddha, that the audience of Mahayana teaching were Ananda and Shariputra, the main chief disciples. You probably may have heard the names of Ananda and Shariputra. Ananda was the main attendant of the Buddha. Ananda was the main attendant of the Buddha for more than, I think, 30 years, around 30 years of his life. Buddha's mission took something like 47 years, and Ananda was attendant for about 30 years, and he was quite a very possessive attendant, by the way. Possessive attendant. So he and Shariputra, and it is said that even a section of hearers, what you call Shravakas, okay, the hearers. You may have heard that, in the Buddha's audience, there are 3 different kinds of mental temperaments of beings and 3 different kinds of people of 3 different dispositions. They are called the hearers, Shravakas. They are called the solitary Buddhas also, solitary realizers, Prateka Buddhas, and there are what you call the Bodhisattvas, the Bodhisattvas, those who aspire to full enlightenment. So amongst the audience of the Buddhas, the Shravakas, the hearers, have also been present when the Mahayana teachings were being given. But it probably may have been something like, just when the Buddha was talking in terms of Mahayana, it was probably just going like this without really going into the years. And those who were open to the Mahayana doctrines, for them, of course, it was totally going into both the years. It must have been something like that. There are also sayings in the sutra where the Shravakas approach the Buddha. The Shravakas, they approach the Buddha and they say that the Mahayana teachings and Mahayana doctrines are excellent and fabulous and very inspiring to hear at. But for us, it is not possible to adopt it because we have become like a half-burnt tree. We have become like a half-burnt tree. You know what happens if an oak tree is struck by lightning and it's half-burnt? So half of it's lost its life and it has no further branches. It's not going to have any leaves, but it's still alive and it's still very firm and standing out of the ground, okay? So it looks remarkable. It's impressive even though it's dead. It's standing out of the ground. So the Shravakas have referred to themselves in that kind of a terminology by saying it doesn't help us because we understand that these are very profound and very inspiring set of teachings, but we just don't think we can adopt these practices. So therefore, you can see that there are different dispositions in the teaching. There are already different dispositions of followers in the teachings of the Buddha. Secondly, you have to therefore understand that the Mahayana had been predominant from the very time of the existence of the Buddha. For example, the famous Heart Sutra that you may have heard of. Heart Sutra was addressed to Shariputra, okay? It was addressed to Shariputra, and it was addressed to Shariputra by Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. So Avalokiteshvara, Manjushri, Vajrapani, and you may call them the 8 close sons. 8 close sons. In Tibetan, Nye or the three clans, Vajrapani, Manjushri, and Avalokiteshvara, or the Bodhisattvas, the eight close clans of Bodhisattvas at large. Most of them are supposed to be enlightened entities. But when a Buddha appears in this world, they appear as ordinary Bodhisattvas. Okay? So in that sense, Avalokiteshvara appeared at the time of the Buddha, came at the time of the Buddha and was questioned by Shariputra about the perfection of wisdom. The famous Heart Sutra that we all know of was questioned, and in answer to those questions, Avalokiteshvara gave those teachings in the presence of the Buddha. So here is an interesting contention that you have to understand, that a teaching, when given by the Buddha, is either inspired by him or either it is blessed by him. It is blessed by him, or the consciousness of the person is blessed, or either he gives his permission to teach. So from that point of that contents of this 4 manner of teaching, that is, once again, the consent that the Buddha might give, that he may not speak, he may not directly speak, but he gives his consent to somebody else to speak. The Heart Sutra is the first example. The second example of blessing the mind stream of the person. In this case, the Buddha blessed mind stream of Shariputra. Shariputra being a Shravaka, being an Arahat, had no disposition for the Mahayana teachings. Nonetheless, blessed by the Buddha, he directly questioned Avalokiteshvara, as a result of which the Heart Sutra was taught to Avalokiteshvara and all of the gatherings. There were other Shravakas also, but they did not hear anything. As I just now explained, they did not hear anything. also blessing their mental continuum or inspiration, there are many other sutras also that the Buddha spoke of. And therefore, they did not, the Shravakas or the Prateka Buddhas did not come to know about it. Also, during the time of the passing away of the Buddha, it was some 500 arahats, 4 destroyers, some 500 or 300 arahats, 4 destroyers that had assembled to give the teachings of, to compile the teachings or to recollect whatever Buddha Shakyamuni had taught during his lifetime. Okay? So, all of these were arahats. They were all belonging to the smaller vehicle, Hinayana, arahat, smaller vehicle. And they belong to the smaller vehicle. And since they were not familiar and since they were not aware, but as I said, even if they were present during the Mahayana teachings, they did not accept the fact that this is a path or this is a goal for them to adopt. So therefore, the compilation, so to say, was not, there was no such mention of the term Mahayana or no such mention of the term heart's perfection of wisdom. Okay? So the perfection of wisdom and those teachings, therefore, as I said, arose somewhere around 300 years after the passing away of the Buddha. It came with Nagarjuna, Chandrakriti, Aryadeva, Buddha Palita, and there are many more names to mention, but that's really not very important for you right now. It is to say that these were the stalwarts. These were the Mahayana stalwarts. They are called the trailblazers. They are called the charioters because when they brought forth the Mahayana teachings and started formulating various treatises in support of Mahayana teachings, what they were actually doing was that they were also composing polemical works. Okay? They were composing polemical words. Now you might wonder why from 3 collections of works to so many different treatises and commentaries and so many works, a development of so much of writing. Why is that so? Well, that's very simple. That's because the Nalanda Institute or the Nalanda University, as people call it, it began with mainstream Hinayanists, Sthavira, you call it the Sthavira school. It began with the mainstream Hinayanists. So when Mahayanist concept was introduced, it was introduced by Nagarjuna. Okay? And when Nagarjuna introduced it, it was revolutionary, it was new, it was radical, it was contradicting mainstream Buddhism. That is the reason why I said, and why I already mentioned, but I repeat once again, the very Mahayana teachings, which are called the Sutra teachings, arose as a result of controversy. Now, if this is too much of intellectual stuff for you, let me make it very simple. If something valuable is going to come around, a lot of people are going to haggle over it. Let me give you a very simple example. We are walking on a footpath with many stones, pebbles, okay? And there are only pebbles. But let us say a kilometer far away, there is a small piece of diamond amongst those thousands or hundreds of pebbles. What happens if somebody notices it? That is somebody, okay? What happens if 20 people notice it? There is going to be chaos. Everybody is going to jump for it. Everybody is going to want it. Everybody is going to try to get it. And they will probably end up even killing each other or beating each other or engaging in any violent action to get it. Why? The answer is simple. A pebble or a stone is of no consequence. A piece of diamond, even if it's small, is very precious, so everybody will want ownership of it. Now, another example. If there is somebody of capacity, beauty, looks, performance, whatever, you're going to have 100 detractors, jealous people in simple terms. You're going to have 100 detractors. If somebody has no capacity, no productivity, no good looks, nothing to contribute, nobody will even glance or even look at the direction of that person. Isn't that a fact? That is a common fact. I'm sure you would probably know that. This being the case, if anything of substance or anything of productivity or innovation or something that challenges the mainstream view or the so-called political correctness, let's put it that way. If it challenges the political correctness, you're going to find 100 detractors and 100 adversaries and opponents raising their hands and weapons and making a lot of commotion about it. Okay. For somebody of no consequence and of no value and productivity, there is going to be nobody hardly to bother or even question. In the same way, when the Mahayana teachings came out, it just didn't come out with fabrications or mythical ideas like it came from a fairy land or it came from the Nagas or that it miraculously surfaced or that is so wonderful because it's so passionate about this or that. It had nothing to do with that. It had to theoretically prove itself. The Mahayana teachings had to prove itself. Do we by any chance need a break? Pardon? It's 2 minutes to 6. Do we need a break? No, I'm asking you. You might need a break. No? Okay. All right. All right. So, now as I was saying, Mahayana came within a controversial background. It grew within a controversial background. That is because it was challenging mainstream Buddhism, and therefore it was dubbed radical, fabricated, not the teachings of the Buddha. Later in interpolations, the Buddha never spoke one single word about these things. He never mentioned anything called what you call gnosis, prajna, superior gnosis or omniscience. He did not mention that. As it is, the mainstream Buddhist doctrine is the goal of arahathood, okay, liberation, moksha. That you probably know. It is moksha, liberation, the goal of arahathood, the fruit or the goal. So, that not being emphasized as the goal being emphasized as Buddhahood and so many other things as mentioned in the Mahayana teachings made it such that those who were mainstream Buddhist at that stage and at that time being the Sthavira or the Shravakas, the Sthaviras, the school was called Sthavira. The Sthavira is the offshoot of the latter development which became known as the Theravada, what we call Theravada today. That is the Theravada school. So, as I was saying, this is one thing you need to understand about the Mahayana background. The second thing is the Vajrayana or the Mantrayanist development. The Vajrayana or the Mantrayanist development was even a much later development. And many scholars tend to point out the period of Vajrayana development as being somewhere as far as the 8th century AD. Although it is disputed and some do not agree, some disagree, but the general disposition is the understanding that Mahayana works, treatises, Mahayana canonical collections started surfacing somewhere around the 8th century AD, approximately around the 8th century AD. Whatever the time span. But when Mantrayana teachings came, Mantrayana teachings even seemed to contradict mainstream Mahayanist teachings. Okay? That's how it was seen. That's how it was perceived. Mahayanist teachings seemed to even contradict the Mantrayanist teachings seem to even contradict the Mahayanist, what you call, stream of teachings. So therefore, the Mantrayanist was disputed in the early period of the what you call stronghold that the Mahayanist has gained. A new controversy arose, which came to be known as the Mantrayanist, what you call, interpretation of the teachings of the Buddha. That became a very abiding controversy in itself, in that it was seen as totally contradicting the teachings of the Buddha. However, the same very stalwarts that I have mentioned, like Nagarjuna, Chandrakriti, and all these big names that we find in the history of Indian Buddhism and even Tibetan Buddhism, these were the people who worked very hard to create many theses and many works and many canonical works that eventually became established scriptures, whereby they established the fact that those teachings were the teachings of the Buddha. Now, how do we then, coming now to the point, how do we then interpret whether a teaching or a transmission is a Buddhist teaching or not a Buddhist teachings? There are necessarily 4 seals, the 4 seals of the Buddhist teachings. The 4 seals of the Buddhist teachings are widely accepted by all Buddhist schools. So they are: all objects are impermanent, all phenomena are impermanent, all objects are of contaminated nature, all phenomena are absent of an inherent self, and nirvana or final quietide is peace. These are what you call the four seals. 4 seals in the sense that they are what you call the trademark of the Buddhist teachings, just as Apple is the trademark of all Apple brands. Samsung has its own brand. So here you have the same with regards to the Buddhist teachings. These are the 4 teachings. Then secondly, we have what you call do not look at the words, but look at the meaning. Do not look at the relative, but look at the ultimate. Okay? There are these other theories of definitions. Then, of course, you have what you call teachings that necessarily call itself the Buddhist teachings, are based fundamentally on 4 factors. They are the 4 Noble Truths and dependent origination. Not dependent origination, interdependent links of origination. Okay? And Eightfold Path. These are what you call the necessarily gospel-spoken mainstream Buddhist teachings. Now, if you look at the Mahayana teachings and if you look at the Vajrayana teachings, do they contradict the very spirit of Buddhism? The answer is definitely not. It does not contradict the spirit of Buddhism. In fact, they validate, or let us say legitimize, the practice of Buddhism and make it even possible in a sense of an innovative way of being able to practice in many different ways. Now, for instance, if we say that the Mahayana and including the Vajrayana teachings do not come from the Buddha, we know as a matter of fact that the Buddha gave teachings according to the different temperaments of different kinds of persons, the mental dispositions and the different temperaments of all kinds of persons. Like, for example, there is a sutra called the Samadhi Nirochana Sutra. Okay? Samadhi Samadhi Nirochana Sutra. In that sutra, it is mentioned that the Buddha turned the wheel of the doctrine. The Buddha gave teachings on three different times in his life, three different occasions to different what you call audiences during his lifetime. The first turning of the wheel was given to the Sthavira school, or let us say the Shravakas and the Pratyeka Buddhas. The second wheel was given to the Mahayanis, and the third was given to both the Hinayanis and the Mahayanis. There is a slight difference in the approach of what is called the definitive teachings of the Buddha, and interpretative teachings of the Buddha. Okay? Definitive teachings of the Buddha means when he says something, he really means it. And that is the ultimate way to adopt and practice it. That is, if you get the message. Because Buddha during his lifetime or all throughout his teachings never used any strong words. Never used words like thou shall do this, thou shall I say it to you, or you do this, or you do that. His manner of teaching has always been like a proposition. And his teachings received by people have always been based on how they postulate, how they interpret the teachings of the Buddha. So therefore, Buddha, in the first turning of the wheel of the doctrine, according to the Samadhi Nirmochana Sutra, in the first turning of the wheel of the doctrine, he spoke about reality as possessed, phenomena as possessed of inherent nature, that is of a self. The second turning of the wheel, he said, it lacks an inherent self-existent nature. The third wheel, he said, both, it neither does or it does. So in this manner of teaching, if you have a person of simple orientation, they are not going to understand what is being said. So therefore, it is something which you need to do some brainstorming. Like for example, when Buddha teaches to one set of audience, like as I was explaining, like in the term of the first turning of the wheel, okay? The first turning of the wheel. He spoke of phenomena as inherently existing. But in the second turning of the wheel, he said, no, phenomena is not self-inherently existing. It lacks self-inherent existence. In the third turning of the wheel, he said, it does and it does not also, which means you probably would have had many people with their thumbs in their mouth, or one thumb in the mouth and one scratching the head thinking, what does he mean? Let me explain it in much more simple terms. Generally speaking, the common mainstream Buddhist understanding is that the Buddha is a very skillful teacher. It is repeated again and again and again and again. It is not once, it is not twice, it is repeated consistently. Yet there are people who will say that, but this is not what the Buddha has taught. They will keep on saying the Buddha gives teachings according to the different dispositions of beings. He even teaches the birds in their language, the Nagas in their language, the gods in their language, the humans in their diverse language. In one speech, he conveys 100 different messages to his audience, right up to the highest heavens, down to the lowest hell, that is the invincible hell. These are mentioned in the sutra. Hopefully you can follow. Can you follow me? Can you understand what I'm saying? Yeah? Good. All right. This is what is said repeatedly in the sutras. In the common sutras of all Theravadins, Mahayanis, everybody, you will find these words over there. Yet there are people who will say that Buddha spoke only in the Pali language. There was no Sanskrit or Prakrit or Devanagari or anything like that. These are the Mahayanists who have wild imagination. they say this. When they agree that the Buddha can speak in the language of the birds, the fishes, the cow, yet they say that the Buddha did not speak in Sanskrit, that there were no original scriptures existed in Sanskrit. Now, in my first years when I began teaching in Europe, I was confronted with somebody, and he point blank told me, but this is all from your Mahayana brainwashing and Mahayana orientations, where you are taught from your very young. How old were you when you became a monk? I told him I was not a kid monk. I became a monk very old. He said, anyway, it has something to do with Mahayana brainwashing. He said, Buddha only taught in Pali. Anyway, it's just an example. It's just an example. So therefore, to say that Buddha reaches out to different diverse audiences in different ways according to their mental dispositions, teaches in the language of the animals and humans and gods and demigods, and then say that he spoke only in one particular language, he spoke only one particular doctrine which is only to be found within the Tripitaka and elsewhere is all fabrication, is not so intelligent. Is a very dull response, okay? Another example of how Buddha teaches people, let me put a very simple example. Like, for example, you must have heard the story of Ajatashatru. Ajatashatru was a king, and he was the son of the king Bimbisara. Bimbisara was a very devoted disciple of the Buddha, and it so happened that his son Ajatashatru put him into prison, of course, because he wanted to ascend the throne, and he was made to do that, manipulated to do that by Devadatta. Devadatta, you know, is the famous cousin, what you call the adversary of the Buddha, the Buddha. Ajatashatru was instigated by Devadatta to put his father into prison, and so therefore he just merely followed that. But later he regretted it. It's a long story, but I will just put it short. He regretted it. On his regret, he had the army men and his generals and some people go in state, means, you know, in a dignified manner to the prison to tell his father that it was all a mistake, and he's released henceforth. So therefore, this is what happened. The army general and a minister and some people, important people, they went forth to the prison to release Bimbisara, the father of Ajatashatru. But the father inside the prison thought that, finally my son has sent people for my execution. That's what he thought. When he heard all the footsteps coming close to the prison, this is what he thought. And he got very shocked by that. He got very shocked because he thought it was impossible that his son would order for his execution. Now it was all a misunderstanding, right? You follow? It was all a misunderstanding that the king thought that his son now has actually sent people to have him executed. So he was so down, he was so shocked, and he was so saddened that he died out of a heart failure. He died out of that. The result of that death was that Ajatashatru became very regretted, very regrettive, and very sort of what you call, distraught. He was very distraught, and he became distressed, and he became even depressed, and he stopped sleeping, and he stopped eating, and etc. His mother, the wife of the king, of course, she said, "There's no use now being depressed like this and not eating and not living like a sane person. You know, what is the use? I already told you shouldn't do this to your father, but you didn't listen." Now the deed has already been done, and whether you ordered his execution or not, he's dead, he's no more. I'm a widow. There's nothing to cry. I'm not crying. You don't need to cry. Yeah. So she said, better than that is you go to the Buddha himself and, put your problem in front of the Buddha and he will give you a solution. But Ajatashatru said, if I go to this master who's praised, this man who's praised by everybody all over the kingdom and all over the country, and who's known to be a very wise and noble and man of high moral standing, he will never accept me because now I'm a sinner. I have killed my own father. So I am somebody who committed patricide. So he's never going to have me accepted. So I can't face him. The mother said, no, you're absolutely wrong. Buddha is a totally different person, she said. You go to him and he will make you feel very comfortable. He said, how can he make somebody committing patricide feel comfortable? Mother, you are talking nonsense. She said, you just listen to me and you go to the Buddha and you will see that for yourself. So the king did finally, Ajatashatru, who was then a king, he did finally go to the Buddha. But he was so worried, he was so timid that he did not want to come from the front gate. So he approached the Buddha from behind. Okay? He approached the Buddha from behind, and he approached with nimble footsteps, very softly from behind. Now, Buddha's way of dealing with people and Buddha's way of addressing them is very characteristic of the Buddha. It is very charming and very amusing and very, very intriguing how Buddha behaves with people, because he behaves with people in a way that you would never expect anybody to behave. So what happened was, when he was coming tiptoe from behind, the Buddha just said, "Welcome, your Majesty, your Honorable Majesty, welcome." So he thought that it was some other monarch who may have come, not him. And then he started getting worried, thinking, now there's no hope, now there's no time for me. But immediately Buddha repeated once again, "Welcome, Honorable, your Majesty, your Honorable Majesty." Then he started thinking, is that really me? And then the third time again the Buddha repeated it. And that comforted him, because he thought, it is indeed me. And so the Buddha addresses me like as if nothing went wrong. So he got confident, and so he faced the Buddha and he sat in front of the Buddha. And the Buddha is somebody who knows what is happening all over the world, in all phenomena in existence. He doesn't need to ask questions like, how are you? How is your family? How are things going on? Have you eaten? Did you sleep well? But this is what the Buddha does. This is what the Buddha does. You might think this is my creation, but you look carefully into the sutras, the Buddha's way of communicating with people is just like that. Have you eaten? Are you well? Is everything all right in the kingdom? And all this, soft, talking, and that calms him down completely. And then the Buddha says, and what may the honor be of your Majesty paying a visit today to me? And so Buddha again knows what the problem is, but he still questions. And then he slowly starts telling the Buddha about what actually has happened. When he finishes with saying that I actually ended up causing the death of my father, and therefore I have committed the offense of patricide, then Buddha says, "Oh, that's nothing to worry. That was something very nice. That was something very wonderful that you did. No, there's nothing to worry. There's nothing to worry. In fact, the fathers are meant to be killed, including one's mother." This is what the Buddha said. These are his words. Not only the father, the mother too. And now that you have done something very good, you can add something better to it. So it's like a nice pizza prepared, you need some more toppings on it, sort of something like that, the Buddha. Something like that. This pizza is good, but you can put some more toppings on it. You can put some more spices on it and things like that. So the Buddha said exactly something like that. This was good, but you can do something even now to make it better. And what should I do? And then Buddha actually taught him the meditation. Meditation and the interdependent link of origination. He went back and meditated, and he achieved what you call the stream vinna and once returner stage. That is just one step away from four destroyer, arahat. He actually achieved that stage. But after he achieved that stage, he started getting nightmares every occasional night. He started getting nightmares. In that nightmare, he saw himself being enveloped in flames, that he was burning in flames. And he was very surprised by that because he had achieved a realization, but also he was simultaneously getting nightmares of this. So he went back to the Buddha. Of course, he didn't think it is anything serious. He went back to the Buddha and he mentioned to the Buddha that he was getting these dreams almost every night. So because he was a once returner, not just an ordinary person, not even a stream winner, but a once returner, so therefore the Buddha said to him, now my dear, Your Majesty, my dear King, the point is that you were the cause of your father's death. And even after your death, you are going to the invincible hell realm, to Avicii, as a result of this. However, don't worry, you have already achieved the state of once returner. If you keep on practicing, you might reach a higher stage of experience. You won't have to experience the consequences of creating this karma. So be rest assured. Know also that what you did was totally wrong and not correct. But now that you are a once returner, you can understand better. The reason why I brought this little story and episode into our discussion here is to give you an idea of how skillful the Buddha is. He never condemns people, he never speaks straight to their face, or he never goes and does something that's absolutely radical or strong in his actions or words. He always uses very gentle words, but that might also give the impression that he never uses strong words, or he just doesn't know how to use strong words, or he's too feminine, or he's too androgyne, or whatsoever. That too is a wrong impression. Because when I was talking about the first turning of the wheel, the second turning of the wheel, the third turning of the wheel, and as I was telling you that the Buddha first said in the first turning of the wheel that existence of phenomena lacks inherent existence. Then in the second turning of the wheel, he says, no, they do lack inherent existence. Then in the third turning of the wheel, he says it does and it does not, and says both the things, which to ordinary understanding would be like simply confusing people. Like if you say, for example, now this is a joke, don't take it seriously. Say, for example, I am the Buddha, and which I'm not. That's why I'm saying it's a joke. Say, for example, I am the Buddha, and you come forward to me and say to me, should I eat or should I not eat? So I use a Shakespearean term, to do or not to do. So what will you tell me? What will you think of me? Even if I'm trying to be very poetical and Shakespearean, what are you going to think of me? You're going to think of me of a nutcase. You're not going to think of me as very profound. Oh, look what he said to me. Even Pythagoras wouldn't have said that to me. Even Socrates wouldn't say that to me. Oh, to do or not to do, he said. How profound, my stomach is already full. You wouldn't say that. So, in the same way, like as I said, the third turning of the wheel, in which the Buddha says, this lacks inherent existence, and also it doesn't lack inherent existence, is quite confusing. But keep in mind, he had two audiences. He had bodhisattvas also, he had Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas also. So he had to cater to all their demands and all their needs. And the third turning of the wheel is taken as the actual interpretation, what you call the definitive teachings of the Buddha according to the Nyingma and the Kagyu school. The Nyingma and the Kagyu school, they take the third turning of the wheel as the definitive. Remember, I used the term interpretative and definitive. In Tibetan, interpretative is called ngeden, and interpretative is called tangden, and definitive is called ngeden, just in case if you are interested. If you can't remember, let it be. Just definitive and interpretative. Interpretative, therefore, means, like as I cited in the story of Ajatashatru, when Buddha said, "It is good to kill your father and mother," do you say, "Yeah, this is what the Buddha said, so we should"? Then you are probably destined to become jihadists. You will probably need an AK-47 in a busy marketplace to go and commit the so-called matricide and patricide. But as you know, this is to be understood as interpretative. Interpretative meaning for the moment and for the person concerned, words like "you evil one, be gone from my presence, you slayer of your father and mother," what sense does that make? Even if it comes from a scripture 1 million year old, whatever it is, it makes no sense. So therefore, it is interpretative teachings. You can understand now, interpretative teaching is like that. What the Buddha is saying is not really what he means. You have to interpret it yourself and come to the conclusion that it is interpretative. Okay? When it comes to definitive teachings, that means when something has been said, it may have been said in a metaphorical sense, but it may be the definite truth. So you have also two ways of relating to truth itself as relative and ultimate. But whether we speak of relative and ultimate truth in terms of interpretative and definitive teachings, these are to be understood as conventional reality. Conventional reality in the sense that whatever words you use to describe emptiness, now let's talk a little bit about emptiness. Whatever words you use to describe emptiness is just merely words, are just really tools to come to the point. In fact, you should have no particular sense of postulation. Neither this, neither that. Neither this, neither that, but it is based on words and what you call analytical observation or analytical postulation of relative reality to get an idea of what we call emptiness, which then becomes ultimate truth. But if you speak of ultimate truth or relative truth, both eventually are duality. Okay, in the sense of emptiness. Now, this is what the consequentialist school or the prasangika, what we call the prasangika, consequentialist school talks about. That is the reason why the consequentialist school, the prasangika, because they do not propose. They do not propose. They neither propose, they neither dispose. So they don't fall into the extremes. The other interpretation of the Buddha's teachings is that it neither falls into the extremes of nihilism, neither it falls into the extreme of eternalism. What is the meaning of these two dualities, eternalism and nihilism? Nihilism means a total negation of things in the sense that nothing exists, everything appearance, including the postulation or the or the reality as they appear on the relative level also does not exist. That is called nihilistic view. And the nihilistic view is called the hedonistic view. Hedonistic view. Now, the extreme view of eternalism would be if you establish a phenomena or an object as permanent, independent, partless, and inherent. Permanent, independent, partless, and inherent. These four things. Permanent itself, in the sense, means you are saying that it will not disintegrate. It will not age. It will not die. It will not disappear. It will not experience change. This is what you are saying. Transformation or change is impossible. This is what you mean when you say it's permanent. Independent means you say that it doesn't have any causes. It does not arise from any cause. It exists by itself. That kind of a phenomena. Inherent means you say that even before that phenomena or object, say like a cup, even before its existence, you say it was already a cup. So, permanent, independent, inherent, and partless. Partless means you say that it is not a composition. It is not a composition of different factors. Now, that is disputed. That is disputed by all schools, but how they interpret emptiness, you will find that it is only the so-called consequentialist school that gives a very refined definition of emptiness. They neither dispose, neither propose. So that, because they say that all fabrication or all postulations are mentally created and are dependent on concept. So, because emptiness is without concept or without duality or fabrication, so therefore emptiness cannot be based on an idea such as that. That is the reason why consequentialists are considered to be the best or the highest of the school in Buddhism, and that is why the Tibetan Buddhist schools, particularly all of the schools, say we are consequentialists. The fact is, not all of them are consequentialists. Also, Tsongkhapa's very own Reverend Guru, Rendawa, he didn't have a very precise understanding of consequentialist theory. Factually speaking, he didn't have it. Tsongkhapa attained it through the help of Manjushri, but also through the help of study of the works of Buddha Palita. Buddha Palita and Chandrakriti, and from these works he established his understanding. So if you're talking about the consequentialist view and who had it and who did not have it, it is very rare and very few. But this is basically what the three turnings of the wheels are about. The consequentialist schools, and in this case, we tend to say the Gelukpa school, they go for the second wheel, the second turning of the wheel. They say these are the definitive teachings of the Buddha. The other two are not definitive teachings. So, generally speaking, the definitive teachings and the interpretative teachings of the Buddha can only be understood if you can understand that what the Buddha formulates, or when he presents something, you have to pick up pieces from that and make your own puzzle. It's like making your own puzzle. It's pieces that is offered by the Buddha. You have to pick them up precisely. And if you make a certain thing, a certain what you call design out of it, and if you're going to ask the Buddha for what it is, he's not going to give precisely an answer for that. Like, for example, questions which were asked to the Buddha, like, where does the mind come from? How does the mind evolve? Was it created? Does it disintegrate? Does it have an end? And things like that. Buddha said are useless questions. He said it has no consequences to searching or looking for everlasting happiness. That does not have any consequences to the real approach. And he gave the example of a young man sitting in the front, in the middle of a vast field, an open field, sitting, when he is suddenly shot by an arrow from somewhere. He is shot by an arrow, and the arrow pierces his right eye. Yeah, right eye. It could also pierce his left eye, but it pierces his right eye. And then this man, then he starts shouting, he starts wailing and crying out loudly and starts saying, "Who shot me this arrow? Was this man tall? Was he short? What race or what caste did he belong to? Was he good looking or was he ugly? What was going on in his mind when he shot this arrow to me?" So the Buddha puts the question back to the person in concern by saying, are these the relevant questions that this person shot by an arrow on his right eye ask? Or should he immediately ask for a physician and for being relieved from that arrow? So you see, in that sense, this is the analysis and this is the way in which you judge the quality of a teaching. Although there is a lot to talk about the quality of the teachings, the quality of the teachings, how they should be, what they should be, but generally speaking, this is how you judge the teachings of the Buddha. So therefore, the teachings of the Buddha are given on the basis of the temperament and disposition of the people. The definition of the definition of this is the teaching of the Buddha is judged by virtue of the definitive nature and its interpretative nature. The judgment of the teaching is again based on that of the four seals, and the judgment of the teaching is based on the fact that it is not the word but the meaning, it is not the relative but the ultimate truth. The judgment of the teaching is again based on the factor that, does the end result lead to the result that the Buddha is talking about? There are many teachers in this world. There are many people who are even called prophets, magi, or masters, or whatsoever. But whosoever gives teachings, do not make it an open space for discussion. What I mean to say by that is, anybody who may have given prophetic teachings, or teachings that they called revelations, dropped out from the sky, or came as thunder or lightning, or has been discovered from some mystical cave or some mystical place, whether you call it Atlantis or Shambhala or whatsoever. Such people who have come with mystical scrolls or secret esoteric teachings or whatsoever, have not left a ground or what you call opportunity for speculation and analysis. Speculation and analysis becomes very important because this is the words of the Buddha himself. Buddha has said, do not follow my teachings just because I happen to be a Buddha. Test them just as a goldsmith tests gold and beat it to its pure content, and then accept it. Not just because I have said so or just because it has been said by me. The other saying of the Buddha is that not just because it happens to be coming from the generation of forefathers, some may say millions of years back it was like that, or I have a history of my great-great-great-grandfathers following it in this way, and I just follow it, or because it has been mentioned in the scriptures, or the gods have created, etc., and so forth. That alone does not legitimize or make or authenticate the validity of a so-called transmission or a teaching. It has to be left to scrutiny. It has to be scrutinized. It has to be seen for the fact that whether it is free of the two extremes of eternalism and nihilism, whether it goes on its foundational basis according to the four seals or not, whether it is not merely a relative interpretation of things, or it is merely a trend that is being followed, rather that it has been analyzed for its truth for what it is. So for whatever the claim, like as I began by saying, there is this claim in general in the Tantras that 16 lives, enlightenment is guaranteed after 16 lives, or it is guaranteed in one lifetime. We do know that Milarepa is the Tibetan Buddha. He's what we call the domestic Buddha. All other Buddhas are all Indian, foreigners. He is the real Tibetan, what you call a Tibetan, domestic Tibetan Buddha, or the real Tibetan Buddha. And the fact that he reached enlightenment in one lifetime can be read from his teachings. Even though Milarepa did not have any canonical or, let us say, classical training in the teachings, I even do not think that he had no writings left. So he had no theoretical, canonical, or sort of what you call scriptural learning or whatsoever. What he trained on was basically the pith instructions. The pith instructions handed down to him by his guru, but he is the example of somebody who has reached enlightenment in one lifetime. So besides him, there are a few more, but it is often Milarepa that is mentioned. So people with theoretical and classical training and knowledge, there are hardly a few to mention. But as I said, there are three names cited in the Gelukpa history, and they are called the three heroes. They are called the three heroes or the three Khampas. They all seem to have been from the Kham area or so, who reached enlightenment in one lifetime. Okay, they were probably the ones who reached enlightenment in 3 lifetimes. So, as I was saying, for all that we say, how do we know that this is possible or this is not possible? This will only be possible if it is put to test, and if it is applied, if it is put to application. Without application, it will not be possible for us to know that if this is the case or not. Okay? So then, when speaking of transmissions, there were different transmissions that came about in Tibet. This was a Tibetan what you call innovation. You could say this was a Tibetan innovation, but just because it happens to be a Tibetan innovation does not necessarily mean that it lacks legitimacy or that it's not directly coming from India. Let's talk about what kind of transmission was available in India. The transmission that was available in India was the word transmission. Okay? Let us say it was just merely the word transmission. Word transmission in what sense was that when the Buddha gave his teachings, he did not have a system. I would say the symmetrical, what you call, cataloging of the teachings of the Buddha did not exist during the time of the Buddha. So there was no systematization during the time of the teachings of the Buddha. For example, it is said that he taught the Four Noble Truths, the 12 inter-Tibetan links of origination, but even before he gave those teachings, the Buddha is supposed to have addressed a monkey and a deer. He imparted teachings to a monkey and a deer. Also, there are sutras which talk about Buddha having given the first teaching to 4 merchants. 4 merchants that were passing by, they saw him, and they observed that he looked very extraordinary, he looked very special. And so therefore, the Buddha they asked some very simple questions, and Buddha gave some very simple answers. So the classical version is that he started with the Four Noble Truths and the 12 interdependent links of origination, and that is what the first turning of the wheel is about. The first turning of the wheel is about that, Four Noble Truths and the 12 interdependent links of origination. Anyway, but as I said, Buddha addressed a monkey and a deer. And what did he address the monkey and a deer? I mean, certainly not something that we can understand, but he did address a monkey and a deer. The first 49 days after he reached his enlightenment, and when he remained there near the Bodhi tree, spacing up and down as the story goes, making those what you call observation walks. At that moment, it is said that a monkey and a deer had been appearing and offering him fruits and coming to him, and so Buddha addressed them. And then the second with regards to the four merchants. So, the first teachings then cannot necessarily be said from that point of view to have to be the Four Noble Truths and the 12 interdependent links of origination. This is a Buddha. He can address anybody at any time in whatever way and manner he may want to, because he alone would know what is beneficial, to address Homo sapiens first or to address the monkeys first. As simple as that. Okay, I'm just rationalizing it. What would the Buddha be doing? He would just do exactly where he would be required to do and what would be asked of him. What would be asked of him to do. So therefore, what the Buddha was transmitting was word transmission, okay? It is called word transmission, and there was no systematization, there was no cataloging. That systematization and cataloging happened only 300 days after the passing away of the Buddha. 300 days, okay? 300 days, because the story goes that Ananda was required to be in that council of arahats, because everybody knew he was day and night with the Buddha, and he heard all of the teachings of the Buddha, and he knew everything, each and everything about the Buddha, almost in a sense, but he never persevered, he never made any attempt to practice, because he was too busy being a secretary, yeah? And he was, as I said, a very possessive and obsessive secretary. He was a very demanding, possessive and obsessive secretary, and being always busy with the menial jobs related to the Buddha, he made no effort in practice. Well, actually, that was his practice. If you know it the other way around, there could not be a greater practice than this. That was his practice, but he didn't see it as practice. That may have been the problem. Because of that, he did not reach any fruits of realization, whereas hundreds who came just the first day or the second day or within a week or within a month gained high realizations, he, remaining 30 years in the presence of the Buddha, gained no realizations. But he was required for the council to, dictate on what the words of the Buddha was precisely. And when the time had come for that, when the 499 or so arahats were conferring amongst themselves, what shall we do? They convened a very clever plan. They decided to excommunicate Ananda. Have you heard of that story? Have you heard of that story? Are you interested in the story? Yes. Okay. They came up with a very clever plan. They summoned Ananda into the congregation, and then they said to him, you were really not a good person during the lifetime of the Buddha. You did this, you do that. They pointed some 9 faults. The 9 faults briefly go like this. You were obsessive and possessive. You demanded, he made 5 demands of the Buddha before becoming the attendant of the Buddha. The story goes that there were 500 arahats already in the entourage of the Buddha, 500 who have attained entourage, and when it was time for the Buddha to get his own attendant, many of the arahats, the 4 destroyers, were imagining that one of them would be chosen for the attendant. And so most of them were very enthusiastic and hoping that one of them would be named the attendant. Especially there was Shariputra and Moggullayana, the 2 main chief attendants, okay? Moggullayana was very good in miraculous powers, and Shariputra was very, very wise in leading the disciples. And Buddha Shakyamuni made Shariputra lead many a times the Sangha in many ways because of his exquisite intellect and wisdom, his capacity, his capability in that. And Moggullayana in miraculous powers. Like Buddha used to send Moggullayana many a times for errands to the different world systems and to the hell realms also, many a times. So the arahats were expecting that they would be chosen as the attendant, but then when the arahats went with the proposition to the Buddha said, no, I just need somebody very simple. I don't need anyone from within your group. And they all said, then who would this simple person be? Then the Buddha simply pointed out to Ananda and said, I would want him as my attendant. Can you go and tell him, please, that if he can take up the post of my attendant? Now the arahats thought that that was really a bad choice because Ananda did not have a very good reputation. He was good looking. He had good looks. The only thing was that he was not known to be cooperative and obedient. And therefore the arahats did not think very highly of him. But when he was chosen, the arahats were talking amongst themselves that how can this be possible? How can the Buddha choose him, But they had no choice because the Buddha deputed them to go and ask Ananda to become his attendant. So they went with the proposal to Ananda, and when they approached Ananda with the idea, Ananda said, nothing doing, I don't want to be the attendant. Why can't the Buddha choose somebody else? I don't want to be the attendant. So they said, how can you say this to the Buddha? He has chosen you, you are fortunate, you are lucky. He said, no, I don't want to be the attendant. But if you insist I must be attendant, then I have 5 demands. 5 demands. What were those 5 demands? The 5 demands was, whenever anybody comes to meet the Buddha, nobody should meet the Buddha without him being present there and asking his permission there. Nobody can carry the robes and the begging bowl of the Buddha except him. Buddha should not accept invitation from anybody if he is not around. Only through him may the Buddha accept an invitation. Okay? And the Buddha should not teach if he is not around. He has to be there, otherwise the Buddha has to be silent. and there's another which I can't remember exactly, but he made five very strange, very arrogant demands, like, Buddha cannot teach when I am not present. Buddha cannot accept invitation from anybody if I am not asked. Nobody should come in the presence of the Buddha if I am not there, and they should come through me. No questions may be asked directly but through me, etc. And these were taken to the Buddha directly, saying, your cousin makes these audacious demands. What would you think now, my Lord? And Buddha said, I agree to all of them immediately. And that's how Ananda became the attendant of the Buddha. So, but regardless of his character, his strong character and his behavior and his having made those 5 demands, nonetheless, when it was time for him to become attendant, he did it with wholeheartedly and with a great deal of devotion. And when the Buddha was passing by, he was the only one crying like a crybaby, crying very loudly and making a lot of noise. And the Buddha was also induced to address him, to call him to his dying bedside and comfort him instead of being comforted himself. So this is the story. These are the very unique things about the Buddha. It's very, very human and very, very touching, these things, in the story of the Buddha. Anyway, Ananda was required to be in the council of the 500 arahats, but he needed to be an arahat before that, and he was not an arahat. So this plan was devised by the 499 arahats to have him expelled on the basis of 9 accusations. You were rude, you were arrogant. And the other thing was when the Buddha developed diarrhea. The Buddha had symptoms of diarrhea before his death. That is just a way of the Buddha's taking on some sickness. It's not like Buddhas get diarrhea or headache or menopause or this or that. It's not that. It's not that. Oh, I do talk about a male menopause. That's not the case with the Buddha. It's my joke, of course. So, so then Buddha asked for water. Ananda was walking with the Buddha, and they crossed a small little rivulet which was being passed by chariots. Chariots were going up and down, and so the water was becoming muddy. And just around the time when the water was muddy, the Buddha said, I'm thirsty, I'm thirsty, I'm thirsty. And Ananda said, but that water is dirty, it's contaminated. No, I'm thirsty, I'm thirsty. Go get me water right now, go get me water right now. Ananda became a little scared because he thought if anybody came to know that he got the muddy water, he would be accused. But nonetheless, because Buddha was pressurizing him, go get me now, Ananda, I'm hungry, will you let me down like this? Go get me now, go get me now. And so he had to go and get water from there. But when he put it on the bowl, the water all cleared by itself because this is the Buddha. So, but the arahats used this as an excuse and said, you were careless, you were dumb and stupid, you even offered Buddha polluted water, and this was the reason why his diarrhea became worse, etc., etc. So nine accusations, and Ananda was expelled. So when Ananda realized that he was really being thrown out of the Sangha, he became very destitute, and he became very sad. He started remembering the days when Buddha was alive and when he had all the authority and when he could do anything he liked, and he was in great joy and happiness, leading his life in the presence of the Buddha. Then he thought this was a grave injustice done to him, and he started spending some time in self-pity, thinking, oh, why did they do this to me? What did I do wrong? This wasn't anything wrong, and so on. After thinking and contemplating a lot for one day, on the second day the thought started coming to him, but I didn't put much effort in practice. If anybody is to blame, it is my fault, and it is after all the karma. And he started recollecting the teachings of the Buddha. With the recollections of the teachings of the Buddha, he started seeing that it was nothing but his own fault, and if it wasn't even that, it was karma. It was karma. And there must be some hidden reason why the arahats all expelled him. So, when it came to that, then he started seriously meditating, and when he started meditating, within a matter of 3 days, he gained what you call the fruit of arahat. When he gained the fruit of arahat, then all the arahats there assembled came to know that he is already arahat, so they summoned him back, and he went back flying miraculously, because being an arahat, you have these powers. So then, the next was his job to describe or to recollect from his memory all of the teachings given by the Buddha. So that is the story of Arahat Ananda, who became Arahat then and there at that particular time. But what am I trying to say? All I'm trying to say is that these were Arahats gathered together compiling the teachings of the Buddha. There could be no Mahayana teachings, not to even speak of the Mantrayana teachings. So the compilation of the teachings therefore lacked Mahayana and Vajrayana, which became a later development. And why am I speaking about the Mahayana and Vajrayana? Because this is necessarily what the Ganden Oral Transmission Lineage is all about. If we start straight on with talking about Ganden Oral Transmission and its development without this background knowledge, I think it will be a little bit difficult to follow. So for today, it's already 1 minute to 7 p.m. And it was a simple explanation based on what I thought would be necessary. I hope it has given some kind of sense, and I think tomorrow we are supposed to, yes, tomorrow we continue with the same discussion. So for today night, I think it should be enough. Gyawa de ye nyurdo da lama sanje drupjurne drowa che jama luba de salago barasho. Oh, wait. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. Please, okay.
Thank you. On behalf of the center and this.
Sure. Oh, che lontana la dico, mani.
Yes. On behalf of my
Oh my goodness.
sinful